up. Get ready. It's going to be a very, very intense journey.
Begin.
What's up, everybody? Andie Eller here, and welcome to episode 132 of the Frame Skip podcast. I'm joined on this fine weekday evening by two good buddies of mine, starting with George from Shortbox Summary. What's up, George? Wearing that Patriots hat as you always do.
Yeah. We waived our backup and third string quarterback and then signed them to our practice squad, which is a puzzling decision. It's a lot of faith in Mac Jones, which there was no real immediate decision that he was the starter even a week and a half ago. So I don't know what's going on, and the season hasn't even started yet. But happy football's back, I think, maybe, probably.
There you go. It's good for football to be back. I don't really watch football anymore, but I know plenty of people are excited for its return. So
it's my favorite game of the year is fantasy football, and I'm only in a work league, my high school league, and a random friends league. So I'm only in 3 leagues this year. I'm cut back. I used to be in 6.
Dude,
I'm only in 3. Feels good.
How amazing would it be if we got to our Game of the Year episode and you came out and you said, well, guys, my Game of the Year is fantasy football.
I thought about doing that last year.
I'd love that.
But I should have done it 2 years ago when I won 2 championships, because what a year.
Yeah. Speaking of winning, Seth Slakehouse is also with us.
I do nothing but win, Austin, actually.
That's right.
I win at spending money. I win at working obscene hours. I win at not sleeping. Absolute champ over here. Nothing but winning.
Dude, you were telling me before the show that you've defeated the Reaper that is sleep itself, because you've been awake for an extended period of time.
27 hours.
Yeah. So you won there.
Yeah. Just the nature of working 14-hour night shifts. It's just the way it go, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. No.
You should try it sometime. It's miserable.
No, that's all right.
If you ever want to appreciate your life, George, I have a job set up for you. You can work for a week or 2 and then go back home.
My record was in college my senior year, like my finals week. I was awake for 108 straight hours.
Ooh. Dude.
No,
that's disgusting.
Yeah.
My job.
I can't believe I survived.
After 72 hours, you're clinically insane. But after
urban legend,
is that an urban legend? I mean, I don't know. I know crackheads stay up like a long time. They'll take meth. Anyway, my job's not too bad, right? I get a lot of days off, but it's the night shift and the long hours. Mm-hmm. And like tomorrow, especially, I go to fire brigade training as the fire brigade leader, and it's gonna be miserable. You have to sit in a classroom for 4 hours.
Taking in all that knowledge.
but I'm doing great.
Good.
I'm telling you what, I'm doing great.
You know, this is a good episode, Seth, because you're doing great, George is doing great, I'm doing great, and we're here to talk about what some people may consider a great movie. Some.
If nothing else, can we at least admit that it is the most controversial piece of Star Wars film?
Yes.
Yeah. So it might be the most controversial piece of nerd culture of all time. I'm not too hesitant to say that.
I can't think of much else that really reached this level of controversy. And by the way, if for some reason you clicked on this episode without looking at the title, we are on this episode going to be revisiting Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. If you missed last week, we rebroadcast an episode the guys did. I was not on it, from a couple years ago, where they did a review discussion on The Force Awakens, and it never continued. So we're finally bringing it back here.
I can't believe it was a couple years ago.
It was in June of 2021.
And we never followed up. That's amazing.
I know.
We talked about it a lot.
It came up in conversation. This specific episode has come up in conversation so many times throughout the years, and here we are. So I'm excited, though. This is going to be a fun one because, like we've already joked at, I mean, this legitimately is one of the most controversial pieces of nerd entertainment, I would say. I mean, I would totally agree with you there, Seth. I can't think of anything else that like was so controversial in my lifetime.
This is like, so I like notoriously, I hate the Star Wars fan base. A lot of times, the criticism and hatred that gets thrown at some of these shows and movies, I think is absolutely ridiculous. But this is the one movie that I was like completely on board with. And when I look back at like the last 10 years, I think this is like the movie release that came out that like truly fragmented
Yes.
and shattered like the fandom to the point where Disney probably should have stopped releasing Star Wars stuff after Episode 9 because of the catastrophe of the sequel trilogy. But I think this is because Episode 7, I think we all walked away from Episode 7 in that last discussion. I was listening to it a little bit today. We're just like, it's fine. It's a fine movie. It's very safe, right?
Yeah.
And I like Episode 7. I think the movies get worse as they go down in the sequel trilogy. But I like Episode 7 a lot. And I like the things that it set up going into this movie. I was constantly looking at theories and like I was really excited for the future of what they were going to do with the sequel trilogy after Episode 7. And boy, was I disappointed.
Well, you know who wasn't disappointed, Seth? The general public, because the thing had a budget of $300 million and it made $1.334 billion in the box office, which is still like one of the top 10 grossing films of all time, which is pretty incredible. What's interesting about this movie to me is the fact that if you go on Rotten Tomatoes now, it still has like a 90% from critics, but then you look at the audience score and it's just abysmal, which normally it's the other way around when we're talking about controversial movies where the critic score is frankly poor and the audience score is super high. I think a good example of that is like the Sonic the Hedgehog movies where they reviewed pretty poorly, but everybody loves them. So
yeah, I mean, that's probably a discussion to have, an interesting discussion to have another time as to like what happened between critics and audiences, because it seems like that those things never align, right? It seems like what the critics are looking for and what audiences are looking for never seem to line up anymore. Where I don't remember it being like that back when I was younger. That seems to be a very new thing.
I agree.
I think it happened when Ebert died, right? He died in like the mid 2000s, late 2000s. Roger Ebert, Siskel and Ebert, the most famous movie critics of all time. Okay, never mind. Fuck me then. All right.
I'll be honest.
For the record, I'm not the idiot for knowing who he is. I just want to be honest.
No, it's me.
You were.
It's me and Seth. Me and Seth did not know.
Fucking children. I think, okay, basically he was like the most public facing and like least condescending film critic that we had. Like he had a TV show like back in the 80s and 90s where he would just talk about movies, him and his partner. And like they would just like talk about movies in like a really simple way and explain complicated ideas. And like I really do think that the centralization of movie criticism was really important to like helping movies grow, because like movies didn't used to make $1 billion, then all of a sudden they did start making $1 billion. And I think it's interesting that like the criticism trust in so much of life, like I'm not just talking about movies at this point, started eroding once like more people had access to similar platforms, right? So like basically you would like read Rolling Stone and you'd be like, oh, what did Peter Travers think about this movie? And then all of a sudden it didn't matter because you were seeing Peter Travers' opinion with 10,000 other opinions, and all of a sudden it was just like, yeah, he thinks this, but like 800 other people think this. Like, who am I more likely to believe, Pete Travers or these 800 other people? And like, honestly, you should probably believe Peter Travers. You should probably believe Ebert and Rober and shit.
That kind of does make sense. I mean, the further we've gotten down the more like citizen journalism way, I guess, for lack of a better word, not that this is journalism, but it's the same idea of more and more people having access to critically review stuff like this. Who knows who to trust at this point, frankly.
Yeah.
But I want to start off here. We're not gonna I know our last episode was like very long. We're not going to be able to put that as much time into this one. So we'll talk kind of in broad strokes, but I want to start off with our overall just immediate thoughts on the movie as a whole and what it is. And so, George, I want to give you the starting spot here. So what do you think of The Last Jedi?
At the time, I really didn't like it. When I left the theaters, I was a little confused about what I had just seen. And over the years, I've pulled like a complete 180 on this movie. And I actually think this is probably the best one. And that's subjective. It's what I think is the best one of the sequel trilogy. Just because it like dared to do things the most different. Well, also, I think it like looks the best of any of the sequel movies. I think the art direction is absolutely incredible. Like even something as simple as like the faded red background of like Snoke's throne room. I'm like, fuck, that just looks cool. Like that just looks awesome. Oh, the Praetorian Guards, they just look cool.
Totally agree with that statement.
All that stuff. Canto Blight, like I still don't really understand Canto Blight as like a set piece, but like it looks awesome. You know, like it looks really cool. The same way like I used to hate in Return of the Jedi when they went to Jabba's palace. Because I'm like, what the fuck are we doing here? And now that's like one of my favorite moments in any Star Wars movie. I'm like, wow, I can't believe we only spent like 40 minutes there. That sucks.
I love that scene. I absolutely love the Jabba's palace arc in Return of the Jedi. When you see all those bounty hunters together and like all the
awesome.
scumbags and villainy, like these bigwigs, pretty sweet.
But I hated it as a kid, the same way I like hated the Canto Bight scene of this movie. And like I said, I've pulled a complete 180 on this movie. I think this movie is the bravest of the three. I honestly think so much of this movie you dislike, not even because of this movie anymore, but because we have the context of Rise of Skywalker, where so much shit presented in this movie as a possibility was just walked back, where it felt like Ryan Johnson was saying yes and then what's his nuts showed up. J.J. Abrams just showed up and was like, nah, we're not doing that. And just like swatted Ryan Johnson's hand away like at every single storytelling possibility. So this is my new favorite of the new three.
Seth, what about you?
Yeah, so I was the opposite. I walked out of the theater and I went to the theater with my buddies Watson, Robert, and Pedro. And they were like laughing at how stupid they thought the movie was. We're all Star Wars fans. And I walked out of the theater like saying like this is one of my favorite Star Wars movies originally, right? It was only when I sat and like really stewed about it and thought about things that I started to hate the movie more and more. It's funny you brought up your point about J.J. Abrams slapping Ryan Johnson's hand, because I feel like Ryan Johnson did that to J.J. Abrams and all the plot points that were set up. In fact, I don't know how this movie made it through the way it did. I can't believe someone from a, like higher up didn't stop and be like, what are we doing? Because it seems, I mean, you've got 3 films to write a story, right? And I think The Force Awakens set up and introduced the characters in a really nice way and set up the conflict, right? But then we spend the whole second movie doing absolutely, I mean, they're not doing nothing, but the plot moves forward in no real way whatsoever. And all the things that were set up from The Force Awakens turned out to be nothing, right? And like this is where the famous quote, like subverting your expectations, came from, and it's like a giant meme now. And there's so much about this movie. Like I was organizing my thoughts, writing them down before the show. And I really struggled to find things that I like about the movie. I'm a massive Star Wars fan. I was not one of the people that became super pessimistic and just hated everything. Like there's Star Wars fans that went like legitimate like crazy after this movie came out, and they just like go on the message boards and they cannot stop talking about how much they hate Star Wars now, right? I just kind of moved past the sequel trilogy at this point. But I will say we'll go into some of my more details later, but I agree with you, George, that it's probably the prettiest Star Wars movie as far as like the setups go, and yeah, that's pretty much it. that's pretty much all I like about the movie. Like it is a pretty movie. Like the spaceship ramming scene's gorgeous, and even like the big lightsaber fight is like the way the colors are set up is really beautiful. But I mean, I'll get back to that later. I think the choreography is like terrible in that scene.
It is.
So
it's pretty poor.
That's all I got to say. That for opening thoughts. I hate it.
So my thoughts on this movie are interesting. I don't know. I guess I'm somewhere in between. I think I'm a little hotter on it than George is, because I saw it, like you, Seth, loved it in the theater. I mean, I saw it probably opening night or whatever it was back when this came out in December of 2017. And then I saw it a second time in the theater because I loved it so much. And I probably watched it again on Blu-ray when it first came out. But aside from that, I had not watched it in, 5 years. I guess it's been at this point 6 years almost. Until 2 nights ago when I watched it again for this episode. And while I don't love it as much as I did initially, seeing it on opening night, seeing it that second time in the theater, because honestly, at that time, I probably would have said, hey, this is one of my top Star Wars movies. I still think it's very good. I have a lot of issues with it on a whole. I think there are a lot of plot elements that still don't make sense to me, but on a broad scale, I would still rank it. I mean, I wouldn't put it above the original trilogy or Rogue One for that matter, but I'd probably put it somewhere near Revenge of the Sith for number 5, number 6 on my ranking. So,
I'm curious about something just with that ranking. Are there any like seasons of the TV shows that you would like put is like Mandalorian season 1? Is that like better than this movie?
That's a good question.
You know what I mean? Like how? Because like we don't have to just choose between movies anymore with Star Wars.
That's
I guess I'm wondering.
That's a good point.
In terms of like our live action opinions, like I still think this is like upper third.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Upper fifth. Like I think it's like still like I think it's got a pretty high hit rate. I think the interesting thing for me is like I think a lot of the parts of this movie are greater than the sum. And then with Force Awakens in particular, I think the sum is greater than the parts, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know where I would rank, honestly, like Mandalorian and Boba Fett, I guess. And I haven't seen Andor, so I can't really say anything there.
Andor's fucking amazing.
Yeah. I need to watch it. But, I mean, I'd probably put Mandalorian Season 1... I mean, frankly, my ranking would be in no particular order. Original trilogy, Rogue One beneath that, and then either Revenge of the Sith or this movie. I'd probably put Mandalorian Season 1 at a minimum right below that, but above the prequels and 7 and 9. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the live action TV shows are like pretty phenomenal Star Wars media, actually. The only one I didn't like was Boba Fett. And honestly, I'll say this. I'm not super hot on Ahsoka right now.
Okay.
And Ahsoka's probably my favorite Star Wars character. So that might play into it. But I think the live action Star Wars shows are really phenomenal. Maybe in some parts as good as Star Wars gets. And I think The Mandalorian, especially season 1, feels exactly like the original trilogy.
Do you guys want to turn this into a Star Wars podcast for a little bit? Like we got this, and then we'll do Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah.
And then by the time we do Solo, then I think the
Oh, dude.
6th episode of Ahsoka will be out, and we can just talk about Ahsoka.
I'm fine with that.
I'm gonna be honest. I'm not gonna watch Ahsoka for a while because I am still like not even close to being caught up on Clone Wars and Rebels. But you guys can talk about it.
You have to watch Rebels for
Yeah.
Ahsoka. It's necessary. It's
Yeah.
does not hold your hand at all.
No.
By the way, quick comment from Alden in the chat. Which, by the way, if you don't know this, you can watch us live on YouTube as we record. So go find us there. That link should be in the podcast description if you're watching this after the fact. But he says, George, what are you talking about? Andor is trash. He says it's slow and about a completely forgettable character. George, what is your response to that as the only person here who has watched Andor?
Andor is like 3 different 3-part movies made by Tony Gilroy, who's like one of the best working TV executives of like all time. Like I think Alden, respectfully, I think you should revisit it. I think that show's incredible. Like I think that's like the height of like this is cinema in Star Wars.
I've got to watch it at some point. I think we watched the first episode, but we never continued it after that. So at some point I'll watch it.
Also, who doesn't love Diego Luna? I thought that guy was amazing.
All right, so we've hit our oh, go ahead.
Good to hear from you, Alden. Missed you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We've hit our general thoughts, so let's kind of get more specific here. I want to go through, like I said, broad strokes here. Not every single plot detail, but just kind of an overall rundown of what happens in this movie, and we can kind of pick out things here and there as we're talking about this. So, the movie starts off pretty much right after Episode 7, and I'm not positive how long after Episode 7 this starts, to be honest with you. I don't know if it's like literally right after 7 ends, or if there's some time in between.
I think this is a big problem with this movie, actually.
Yeah.
Is how immediately it picks up after Episode 7. Right? Because like we don't even get a sense of time with Empire Strikes Back. We know it's like some time, but like it turns out like, oh, canonically it's like 5 years. But whatever, like there's just like all of a sudden a new status quo at the beginning. The fact that this movie like starts minutes after the end of Episode 7, I think is a huge fucking problem for it. I think they should have taken a beat, started somewhere else.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, because I think the advantage that like you said, the original trilogy has, and even frankly the prequel trilogy, is that you get some off-screen character development, and when it comes back, they've kind of aged with you as the viewer, the characters of the movie, and it gives a different feeling, I suppose, for lack of a better word. It gives you a different place to start it, so it's not so familiar right immediately. And I would agree with you there, George. But it starts off literally right after 7 ends, essentially. And the rebels are all fleeing, or the resistance, I guess, as they're calling them in this trilogy. They're all fleeing the First Order, and basically the big opening sequence is Poe taking on, like, single-handedly this new First Order dreadnought ship, which, can I just say, the design of that ship is freaking fantastic. Really, really cool.
It looks like 2 Doritos stacked on top of each other, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That being said, it's very jarring immediately when you get like Marvel-esque humor from Poe to Hux when Hux is on the bridge, and it just does not fit for me. Does not fit.
It's one of my biggest problems with this movie.
Yeah.
Is the forced MCU humor that we get in very, very dramatic moments.
Yeah, I mean, this was a super serious moment, and I'd say my other moment like this, Seth, later on is when Luke tosses the saber. It doesn't fit tonally with like the series at all, neither of those moments. And I know they're supposed to be like, oh, that was funny, but it just doesn't work for me. And it immediately starts with Poe, like literally 60 seconds into this movie. So,
well, it doesn't just take the sting out of the moment for Poe, but also it's like, man, the New Order, the First Order, whatever, they're a bunch of fucking morons. Like, the way they had Hux just, like, completely campily, like, sincere about the confusion in the moment. I'm like, you guys are losing a war to these fucking idiots? Like, are you serious? Like, this guy couldn't wipe his ass if he had to right now. Like, this is who you're losing to? You should be fucking embarrassed, frankly, Resistance.
Yeah. So
yeah, I agree.
the thing this movie does get right though, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, in my opinion, is that visually there are a lot of great visual moments, and certainly the flight sequence here where Poe is like basically tracking down the dreadnought and taking out all the like cannons or whatever they're called. I thought that was a pretty cool opening sequence overall, aside from the forced humor.
Yeah, I actually in my notes I have on the good side that I think this opening battle feels great. Like I think this opening battle is about as good as Star Wars fight scenes in space get, cuz like I don't like A New Hope. Like Episode 4 is probably my least favorite Star Wars movie. I know it's a very controversial take,
Wow.
but the last 45 minutes of A New Hope are the most boring star battle I've ever seen. And it's like the same exact explosion going off 100 times and it puts me to sleep every time. I do not like A New Hope. And when you compare that to like this space battle is like very, very intense. There's very high stakes. You see what's her name's sister become like a hero immediately.
Yeah, Rose with the bombing
Rose's sister. Yeah.
at the beginning. Yeah, some cool stuff there. Although I gotta
still not crazy about the gravity fed outer space bombs.
That's what I was about to say. That bothered the living crap out of me watching this. So I was like, okay, this is a cool sequence, but they're dropping quote unquote bombs in space. That doesn't work. That doesn't work.
they're like an upper atmosphere of this planet, right? But like this is the only place this would work. You have to be close enough to a planet to get gravity, right? But they built these whole ships for this singular purpose. And they're not fast ships, so they wouldn't work close to land. So I don't know, but that's my only complaint with this actual starship battle.
I do think it's really funny that like they kind of double down on X-wings, right? Like I don't know what the new ship is called, but it's a fucking X-wing. Like let's just call it what it is, right? Yeah. It's like, oh no, but we split the engine, so it's like half of it's on the top wing and half of it's on the bottom. It's cool, yeah, it's an X-wing. Why did they think this was an upgrade from a Y-wing? And like, I don't care about this argument. Like, I really don't. But like, I do think in this space where we're being respectful of the people who made Star Wars, like we're just talking about in context of the universe, right? Like, I'm not shitting on Rian Johnson. I think all the hate spewed towards Kelly Marie Tran's character. I think that's like one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen social media used for. Like,
totally
it's
agree.
Awful. If you're like. If you're so upset by Star Wars that you need to like threaten or insult real people, it's like you're a fucking loser, dude. I don't know what else to tell you. Like stop letting Star Wars be such a big part of your personality.
I've never understood people that attack actors for something that's not their fault whatsoever. Like
no, it's like
get mad at sense.
Producers, get mad at writers, but even then, don't get mad at them.
Especially Kelly Marie Tran, because I can't tell you a single thing she did in this movie that was like egregious, literally in any way. I mean, she was fine. That was actually a note I wrote down, was like rewatching this, I truly didn't understand any of that drama back in the day.
Well, I mean, I think her character is really stupid, but yeah, I think she's a bad actress.
Yeah. Well,
but also like sorry, go for it.
Well, I was just how far along are we considering this scene? Because Finn's opening moment, I wanted to bring up the movie as we talk about it, and I have it shot by shot here on Disney Plus. Finn's opening scene takes place like during the battle, like right after. I would say it's in the same general section of the movie. They immediately make Finn not important and like more of a comedy character, and he should not have taken that role in this series.
Especially not after the first movie.
No, and Finn, you could argue, was the more of the heroic figure in the first movie, and they reduced him in the second movie, and then even more so in the third movie. And I'm not really sure why they went about it that way, because he's probably got the most interesting character arc in like the most interesting backstory at the very least of all the main characters in the series. So I just want to say I'm not a big fan of how Finn is characterized right off the bat as just like a comic relief.
I think,
especially because like he put a lot of thought into his character too. I thought, right? Because like so many of the Empire and First Order, like they're British, and like John Boyega is British, right? So like why like the fact that he made like a conscious decision to use like a more Western accent, like I think that's like, oh, that is interesting. It's like you were like giving us a hint with your voice that like you were not an Imperial. I'm like, oh, you actually like put thought in consideration into this, and then just to have his character become so much less important as it goes on. When you're right, like I do think like having like a defection from the Empire, like when he like escapes that ship with Poe in the first movie, I'm like, this is fucking sick. Like this is awesome.
This is awesome. Great sequence.
Also, I never made the connection that the Empire is all British.
Yep.
I think all like for some reason Crix Nadine doesn't have a British accent, but also he defects to the fucking rebels in Return of the Jedi. So what can you do? Also, like, again, like, this is kind of my big problem with, like, a lot of things, and, like, kind of happens with Ahsoka, too. But again, like, I'm trying not to get hung up on smaller things. But, like, the fact that, like, this is at most a day after the attack on Ilum, right? Like, at Starkiller Base. But realistically, it's, like, within a couple hours of the attack on Starkiller Base, right? Because, like, it's long enough for Rey to get everyone back. Or I guess Chewie to get everyone back. And then Rey and Chewie to go seek out Luke Skywalker, right? And he got fucked up by Kylo Ren's lightsaber. And he's like his first scene is him like getting out of like the hell set. And like I understand, like this is like a key character for this movie, so you want him in, right? Like he's in theory a lead, but it also is kind of like, oh, so I guess like there's just less stakes.
Well, like he immediately wakes up and bangs his head off the thing, and like rolls out, and like the water pipes break off and water shooting everywhere. It's supposed to be like a very comedic scene, and I'm like, we're immediately taking the piss out of Finn immediately, and I'm like, this was a guy that like his last scene he took on a Sith, right, untrained, and like he stood up, and like he stood up for himself, and like he had like that's him. The Force Awakens Finn is awesome. And then we go to The Last Jedi and we immediately take the piss out of him. And I'm like, all right, well, that's great. And it's just, I don't like it. I don't like it at all.
So this touches on frankly, my biggest problem with this entire sequel trilogy, and in particular this movie, is the fact that it seems like the characters change each time we hit a new movie. They're totally different characters. I mean, we were talking a little bit before we started recording about Poe, and Poe like is literally a different person in this movie than he was in The Force Awakens. And likewise, Luke, which we'll talk about, his entire character does not make sense in this movie.
No.
And so it continues in 9. I mean, everybody changes again in 9. There are more issues in 9. So I don't know what the problem was there, why they couldn't just at least, if they were unsure about the plot, why could they not at least nail down the characters and who they are as people? I don't know. But continuing along here, I think this is kind of where you were talking about, Seth, where Finn kind of comes in. But, you know, they destroy this dreadnought, they jump away into hyperspace, and then they find out that essentially the First Order has a device that can track them through hyperspace. And they find this out because Kylo Ren shows up. He's about to blow up the cockpit of this lead resistant ship, but he discovers, I guess through the Force, I don't know, that Leia is standing in the bridge and kind of holds off on his trigger. But two of his Imperial buddies, I guess, come through, and
that's the official term. Yeah,
his buddies,
the IBs, the Imperial buddies. Yeah.
They come through and destroy the bridge, and this is where you get that famous sequence of Leia getting dragged out into space, freezing, and then reanimating with the Force and pulling herself inside the ship. How do we feel about this sequence?
This part used to really bother me. I have eased up on it quite a bit, especially because every scene from here forward, or like every Force sensitive character, we've seen them do something that no other Force sensitive person has done before. So it really does seem like they're rewriting the rules on the fly. And like, sure, that like kind of bothers me because like I think there should be limits on characters' power. But like I know that if you're in the vacuum of space, you have like 6 seconds before your entire body like the water freezes and like you just like puff out and like and like inflammate yourself. Like I get that. This doesn't bother me anymore. I still think it just like looks shitty. It's probably the shittiest looking part of the movie because she's really old. She's really old. I don't think they put her on wires to like make her do it and then composited it. I think this is like 99% CGI and maybe a stunt double, so I don't think it looks very good. That's my issue with it.
Yeah, I was gonna say that as well. Like I don't have a problem with Leia using the Force and pulling herself back to the ship. I mean that makes sense in the context of how we've seen people use the Force before, and she's the daughter of Anakin Skywalker, the twin sister of Luke Skywalker. Like she's very clearly Force sensitive. It looks so bad though, and it's so cheesy. Yeah. It is bad how bad it looks. But that's really my only thought process with it. Also, here's my thing. I don't know how far along this movie was in production when Carrie Fisher died. I know it came out after she died, right?
It was done. After. Like they had already filmed shit for. They had already filmed most of her scenes for Rise of Skywalker at this point because they shot them back to back. I
really think this film should have been delayed, and they should have taken out the fake out death scene that she had. I think it was like super borderline disrespectful, and you're watching this movie on opening night and you're like, oh, this is how they're gonna write out Carrie Fisher. Like this must have been like a thing, and then like she survives, and you're like, okay, this is weird now. So I don't know. I didn't like it. I think they probably should have just axed that whole scene because it didn't seem tasteful to me.
That didn't really bother me, to be honest, on that standpoint, from what I can remember, at least. I mean, because obviously we've got to transport ourselves back to 2017 for that. But yeah, I would agree that I don't really... The Force thing itself does not bother me. It's just the way that this was presented visually is so poor. It just really does not work for me.
Well, it's pretty amazing, too, because this is a year after Rogue One. Mm-hmm. And like, I actually think that CGI is... honestly kind of in poor taste, not because of Carrie Fisher's advanced age or whatever at this point, but like I'm just like, oh, so like where's the fucking limit? Like when are we gonna stop remaking actors' likenesses, But like the Carrie Fisher at the end of Rogue One, I think like, oh, that looked pretty good compared to this. The real travesty of this fucking scene though, and I gotta be honest, I know one of the other controversial characters from this movie is oh my god, the actress's name.
Laura Dern.
Laura Dern, thank you. Yeah, Holdo. Like, I know everyone fucking hates Holdo. I actually liked Holdo. I love Laura Dern. I think she's an amazing actress. I could have used more of Laura Dern. I think you're right, Seth. They probably should have rewritten the Carrie Fisher to take out that scene, but like start having Laura Dern take on more of a leadership role within the Resistance or whatever. They just ice my favorite character in fucking Star Wars in this scene and like don't even mention it in death. Like they just kill Admiral Akbar out of fucking nowhere in this scene.
That's so
and they
true.
They don't say a goddamn thing about it. Then I'm sorry to skip ahead, but they just fucking ice Laura Dern later in the movie. And it's like you're telling me that like Admiral Akbar wouldn't have fucking rammed this ship into that goddamn double slice of pizza wide Star Destroyer they fucking have? Like he would have loved to do it. He would have gone down in a blaze of glory. Do that. Hold on to Laura Dern. She's a pretty fucking good actress. Keep her in your movie. And send him off into the sunset, like save my guy Akbar.
Good impression there. Wonderful.
I agree. I've been doing it for a very long time.
So
I love Akbar so much.
Akbar's awesome.
He is. So this scene continues basically with them continuing to flee. They're just trying to stay as far out of range of this ship's, the New Order ship's, I guess, blasters as possible, so that they're not damaged. So they're unable to jump to hyperspace, and they're kind of just floating along like a I guess a mouse on a string or something, and a cat hanging behind it. So, this then cuts to, and I'm not sure how to. Seth, you probably know. Is it Octu that Luke is on? Is that how you pronounce it? Octu.
Yeah, Octu.
So it cuts to Octu, basically exactly where The Force Awakens ended, with Rey holding out Luke's Luke's lightsaber to him. He then grabs it and tosses it over the freaking edge of where he's standing, which sucks.
I just gotta say real quick, this is the kind of stuff that happens, right? When you get people to write things like this that are, you get them based on purely their acumen, right? And like their name. Like Rian Johnson makes great movies. Knives Out is phenomenal. Like it's one of my favorite movies. This scene, like the whole characterization of Luke Skywalker in this movie is wrong. All of it. And even Mark Hamill himself told Rian Johnson that, right? Like he famously looked at him and said, I completely disagree with everything you've written about this character. There's like a really famous line, right? And I mean, so she hands Luke Skywalker the lightsaber, and he doesn't even say, "Hey, who are you?" Right? His first instinct would hand it a lightsaber to just toss it. His father's lightsaber, nonetheless, is to just toss it.
Yeah, the one that he's been missing for like 20, 30 years at this point.
The lightsaber that Obi-Wan Kenobi gave him, just throws it. It's like, okay, we're just gonna throw it. Not like, hey, who are you and why are you giving me this?
Where did you even get this? But that would be a valid question.
It's just like like one of those Marvel MCU like comedy skits, and I was not big on it. It did not make anybody laugh.
I have absolutely no problem with that scene, to be honest. Like from a story perspective, I guess like execution wise, I do have an issue where like he does throw it like it's a fucking Charlie Chaplin movie. You know, like if you just dropped it, okay. You know, or if he like tossed it with like some kind of conviction as opposed to just like some jackass, he just like tossed it over his shoulder. Like that's my problem with it. But like I don't know, after everything the dude went through, you know, he thought he was like following his heart, thought he was like rebuilding the Jedi Order, thought he was doing right, and then he like had the same fucking issue that happened the last time where like your most promising student turns to evil. I can see him being like disillusioned and like in disbelief and be like, oh no, it's power that corrupts. Like power is like the problem. And so like if there's no more Jedi, then there's no more power. So like I have no problem thematically with it. But yeah, he tosses it like a fucking jackass. That's the beef. Like if he had like there's a way to do it where it's like, oh fuck, like he never wants to see a lightsaber ever again. Like that's powerful. But him just like flippantly like, fuck this, I don't like sports ball, you know, and just like tosses it like that.
I mean, like you're right. If he had thrown it with like out of passion, like smashed on the ground or like thrown it into the building or something like that, like out of anger, like that would have made a lot more sense. Luke Skywalker's whole character doesn't make sense in this movie. It just
and this it immediately sets it up. It immediately sets up this poor interpretation of him, in my opinion. I mean, I know this was Rian Johnson and whoever wrote the screenplay for this movie, that it was their interpretation of Luke, but
it was Rian Johnson, I believe. So.
Yeah. But at the same time, just in my head, like it just didn't fit for him. So,
but also, like, unlike the beginning of this movie, like this Luke Skywalker, this is the first we've seen of him in 30 years. So, like, I have no problem with him acting differently than the last time we saw him. Like, that's my entire lifetime's difference. Right? Like, since we've seen him canonically. So, like, if anything... No, I guess, like, the Mando cameo doesn't, like, throw off that timeline. But, like, I don't know. Like, it's been enough time where, like, I can accept that this dude is different. This dude is pissed. This dude is jaded. This dude's disillusioned. Like, I can accept all of that because we haven't seen him in so long. But, yeah, it's just the candy-ass nature of him tossing it, like I said, like a Charlie Chaplin silent film. Where I'm just like, okay, that's the part that I got umbrage with.
Also, just real quick, as I'm watching this along with how we talk about it, the end of Rey's staff is so clearly a lightsaber, and no one saw it. not a single one of us, as we were all making these theory videos and like diving deep into every little scene, noticed that the end of her staff is a lightsaber. And it's
That's
very obvious, dude. Like she literally just cuts the end of the staff off.
Yeah.
But anyway, continue.
Yeah, so basically she shows up, the toss happens, and she's kind of trying to get Luke to come back to the Resistance, where all that left off in episode 7. But he basically says no, and like you mentioned, George, he just goes about saying essentially that the Jedi need to come to an end. And so that's why he has no interest in helping. But he does eventually agree to give Rey kind of some teaching lessons, just in how to use the Force and various things. Just kind of interesting, I suppose.
Because he doesn't believe it, and that's the whole thing, right? Is that
Right.
like he doesn't believe the things that he's saying,
Right.
and he keeps going back on it. And this comes back later in the movie when he has the conversation with Yoda, and it's like, well, where was this guy? Like, were you just faking it? Like, are you just being dramatic? I hate Luke Skywalker in this movie.
Yeah.
I hate him. I mean, none of it makes any sense. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Continue.
No. Luke, in my opinion, is the worst part of this movie. Objectively, I should say subjectively from my viewpoint.
It's objective. Just say it. Just stick with it, Austin.
It is the biggest issue
from
I
a
have.
certain point of view.
It is the biggest issue I have with this film. Right after this, though, is where we get into more, as you mentioned earlier, George. We're talking about new abilities. You saw some of what Leia did, pulling herself onto the ship. You get your first scene where Rey and Kylo Ren start communicating with each other over who knows what distance through the Force. And I think
this is awesome. Like, this is really cool.
Yeah, the way this is shot, actually, I really like. It's very cool. I like the whole use of sound and how the sound kind of, all sense of sound essentially stops when they're talking to each other. I think it's actually quite cool. I know some people when it came out, were kind of mad because they were like, well, this has never happened before. Well, how does this make sense? But I don't mind something new going on.
Is this the shirtless Kylo Ren scene?
Not yet, but we can talk about it.
That's later. Okay. I just think it's so funny in the shirtless scene how it really reminds me of like the 1940s when like Humphrey Bogart was like the sexiest person on the planet, and like you look at him now, it's like, dude, you'd be like picked last in pickup basketball. Like, you're so fucking short. You're like, you got a weird body that like you can barely cover up with like a tank top. Like, I think he has such like a unique physique in this movie that like the decision to make him shirtless, I think, is awesome. I think it's great. I think it's such a weird thing. Have we ever seen someone's nipples before in Star Wars before this? Except for like Luke in the Bacta tank, I guess.
There was a shirtless scene of Anakin at one point, I think.
That was a fuck scene, right?
I don't know.
Actually, I don't know. Maybe I'm making that up in my mind. I don't know. We missed a really vital scene that I actually think is really powerful. It's Luke going to the Millennium Falcon.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And having a conversation with R2-D2, and it's the only time in this movie that I think Luke feels like himself, and I don't understand why. He walks in the Millennium Falcon, he turns on the lights. He sits down at the game table. I forget the name of the game. And R2-D2 turns on and comes to see him. And he's like, R2, like, he's super happy. And it sounds like his old voice, right? And that's like, I don't know. I'm not going to repeat myself, but what, like, I want to know, like, behind the scenes, like, concept behind what they're writing for Luke Skywalker in this movie, because it doesn't seem to come across. Whatever they were trying to portray doesn't seem to come across, because he seems like he's being fake and dramatic to Rey the whole time.
So
and I'm just watching. He watches the original clip that Leia had sent Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I think that's a really cool scene.
It is a great sequence, and he goes into the cockpit and grabs Han's dice.
Which, am I crazy, or were they just introduced in this movie? They were, right? That wasn't a thing before this.
No, they were there. Like, that was like, I feel like that was like a Star Wars TCG card game thing. Like, I feel like that was like an item you could have. Like,
They
they were definitely mentioned before, but it was always like, wow, he's cool. He's a fucking gambler. He's got dice hanging from his rearview mirror or whatever. You know, like it was never like, oh, here's this integral part of the Star Wars mythos.
Yeah, they've
I
always
never
been
noticed
there.
them.
I don't think they've ever drawn attention to them though until this movie, and then they obviously immediately came up 3 months after this movie when Solo released. They were in that movie quite a bit. So, but yeah.
So yeah,
Okay.
they were only in A New Hope.
Interesting.
They were only in A New Hope, and that was it. And the rest of them were in like comics and stuff like that. But there was A New Hope, and then the next was The Last Jedi. That's probably why I didn't notice it.
Didn't know that. Fascinating. Well, shortly after this, and again, just as a reminder, this is kind of a slimmed down version, so we may miss a few scenes here and there. So if you guys have any outside of what I'm bringing up that you want to discuss, feel free. But kind of this all comes to its head when it's eventually discovered that Luke. The whole reason why Luke is in hiding and why he's cut himself off from the Force, which we discover, is that he essentially was trying to rebuild the Jedi Order with a bunch of kids. Ben Solo, of course, being one of them. And he essentially senses the fact that Snoke has corrupted, quote unquote, Kylo Ren at the time, and goes to try and kill Kylo Ren, or at least he has the thought of killing Kylo Ren. He steps into this little home that he's in and lights up his saber and is on the verge of doing it until Kylo Ren turns around and basically destroys the home they're standing in, and they go off and do whatever. But that's all kind of revealed in this moment. And
Seth's got his head in his hand,
does.
And like I understand why. I really do. However, I think something needs to fucking happen to Luke Skywalker. Like, he can't just be like perfect the entire time. So I like the idea of him so worried about someone else becoming like the new generation's Darth Vader that Luke almost becomes the new generation Darth Vader. Like, I think that's interesting. I don't think they explore it the best, but I think putting that shit out there is interesting. However, not executed effectively.
His father was a mass murdering maniac. All right, Darth Vader killed an untold amount of like humanoids, right? A disgusting amount. I want you guys to know, I don't know if either of you read it or not. Disney added more context to this with the comics. There was a 4-part Ben Solo comic where they showed how Snoke manipulated him. Snoke had already not taken control, like literally, but like had been influencing him for a long time before this. And then there was a big fight with him, like I think it was 3 other Padawans, and he killed them all. And then after that, Luke like reads his thoughts or whatever, right? It doesn't make it better. This is the guy who like drug his father out to the Death Star. He was like the symbol of hope for the galaxy, right? That was Luke Skywalker. And he's not even going to try and help his nephew. He's not going to do one thing to try and help his nephew. He's going to be like, fuck this kid. Come on. What is this? we're just gonna immediately cauterize his brain. Just all right. That's
his nephew, by the way, which I think is an important thing to bring up. This is not some random kid. It is Han Solo and Leia's child.
Yeah, his best friend and his sister's child. He's just gonna right through the neck. Just
his best friend, his sister, and his ex-girlfriend's child. Yeah.
I hate that, dude. That scene is so infuriating. Like, and I don't know what they were thinking. Like, and like I said, I think this is just a case of someone who wasn't a fan of Star Wars and wanted to be like the guy, and he wasn't the guy. That's what I think.
Really quick, can I take your temperature, both of you, on 2 things that we haven't discussed from this scene on this planet yet? What's your temperature on porgs?
Love them.
I like porgs.
Excellent addition.
Okay.
Porgs are
And what's your temperature on the reptilian nuns dressed in Victorian era nightgowns at all times?
They're fine.
Love them.
Also,
feels like a Doctor Who alien. Fucking love them. Yeah, I think
it
that's
does,
great.
or like Stargate or something. It feels like cheap sci-fi.
So
yeah, I don't have a.
The one question I had though watching this was like, okay, they show up I think for the first time because it's the first time Rey sees Kylo Ren and she pulls out a blaster and fires at him, but it hits the wall behind her and destroys it. And she walks out and Luke's there and he's like, "What the hell, man?" And all these lizard people are around. But I'm like, "What? This is cool." But where the hell were these like 40 lizard people the day before when she arrived on this planet?
Yeah.
Also, I'm like terrified. She like absolutely killed a little lizard baby in that house. Like it was just like G Baby in that. Yeah. Was that Keanu Reeves movie? Hardball, just like G Baby in Hardball. R.I.P. G Baby.
Well, also maybe we're looking at this from the wrong perspective, right? Maybe Rey blasts a hole in the wall out of like crazy like fear and anger.
Yeah.
And Luke's like, I ain't teaching this bitch how to use a lightsaber. You kidding me? She's absolutely nuts.
Okay, so I got to go back to the Kylo Ren and Luke thing for just a second because I wrote down a line that came up during that scene when Luke is explaining to Rey what happened that just felt so out of place and wrong. He said, quote, "It was a Jedi Master that created Darth Vader." And I heard that and I was like, hold on a second. What's happening here? How does this come into play?
Yeah, because like he wouldn't, unless he's had like deep conversations with Obi-Wan Kenobi as like Force Ghost. That's not the interpretation I got of the Force Ghost thing, right? And it's later like it's supposed to be very painful for a Force Ghost to like appear.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not just like chilling, having like a cup of tea, and Obi-Wan Kenobi's like, "Let me tell you about my greatest failure." Like, I'm not really sure what that line is pertaining to.
What I told you was true from a certain point of view. It's like, fucking what, Dr. Seuss? What did you just say?
It just felt so out of place. It was like, all right, that whole plot has resolved. Like, that has been done.
Maybe unless he's meaning to talk about Anakin Skywalker, who, by the way, never got the rank of master. So we need to make that very clear.
pretty important plot point, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on there.
Anyway, so shortly after this, Rey leaves. She heads back to. There's a little more that happens in between, but the long story short is she leaves, heading back to. I guess at this point she's just going back to the ship, or trying to find, I guess, her people. And then the final sequence we get on this planet is Yoda showing up as a Force ghost, being like, "Hey, Luke, it's okay to fail. By the way, lightning bolt. Goodbye, Jedi library," which turns out Rey stole earlier, and he did not know.
So like, here's the thing, right? And this is something that's been massively explored by Dave Filoni.
Yeah.
Who I would say is like really the new George Lucas, like he was like his apprentice, right?
Yep.
Is that the Jedi Order did need to end. It wasn't the Jedi like principles.
Yes.
It was like their dogmatic nature and like how easily corruptible they became. Like there's a really, really great line in the Revenge of the Sith novel. It's an internal monologue when Yoda's fighting Darth Sidious, right? And it's not word for word, but it's like Yoda realized that like he lost. And he always had lost. He had lost years ago. He never had a chance in this fight. And it's because from the beginning, Sidious worked his way into the Jedi Order, found its cracks, found its weaknesses, and corrupted them and weakened them. The Jedi had not been able to have foresight, like to see things in the Force for like years, but they were too proud to admit that they couldn't do it. So like they were all pretending like they had much more like foresight than they did, and Sidious was the cause of that. And I think that's such a phenomenal scene because it's so clear. Like as a little kid, you're like, "Oh, I want to be a Jedi Knight," right? And then we get so much more context for the Jedi from the prequels and especially the Clone Wars in like the later seasons. And you can really see how Anakin, you can sympathize with Anakin and see how he could fall to the dark side, and obviously not like slaughtering children and a massive amount of innocent people, but we're gonna save him again. But if anyone was gonna realize this post-mortem, right, as a Force ghost, it would be Yoda, where he'd be like, "No, the Jedi teachings that we had weren't correct. They weren't right. We made mistakes." That is a great scene, and that's one of the other things that I wrote down on my good list for this movie is like that scene with Yoda is so important to the Star Wars series, and it's in the worst fucking movie possible as far as like world building and lore of Star Wars goes. And it makes me so upset because and that's also when Luke does his 180, right? Like he talks to Yoda, he understands now. I don't know why they couldn't have this conversation years ago, but he understands now, and he's like, all right, now I'm back on track. Didn't seem like you needed Yoda to do that, man, but this is the scene I was talking about earlier when Yoda strikes the tree. Luke's like immediately upset. He's like, "They're sacred texts." Like, well, you didn't seem to give two shits about the texts 20 minutes ago, Luke. So I don't know.
But like, this is, I think, one of the faults of the movie, right? Because like you're right, that is like an amazing like jump in how we read this critical thing to us, right? It's like, oh fuck, the Jedi Order had to change. Like that's great. Like the sacred text, like for Kylo Ren was right. You know, kill the past, forget the past, kill it if you have to, whatever the line is. And then just for the books to fucking be there on the Falcon at the end of the movie, it's like, all right, so like, what did we accomplish here? Like, what did we really learn? Like, I think it's like movies have no.
I never even put that together. I never even realized that.
It didn't commit. It didn't commit to that scene.
And Rey has no one to teach her problems now.
the books don't fucking matter. It's like, no, it's just. Like that, I think that's my biggest problem with this movie, and my biggest problem with Rise of Skywalker. But I think this movie does a better job of like presenting bolder ideas and walking them back less than Rise of Skywalker, letting us think Chewie died for 3.5 minutes before ta-da, he's okay.
Stupid
he was
moment.
on another ship. I'm like, why'd you fucking do this then? Also, we didn't talk about it at the top. This is also the longest Star Wars movie, if I am correct. I believe it's like 2 hours, 21 minutes. 2:22, something, whatever. It's like 2 hours and 20-ish minutes. Do we think also like maybe Star Wars movies should be like a tidy 2 hours or less? Because like otherwise they get too much time to like too much free rope to hang themselves with a little bit.
It depends. Like the last Ahsoka episode that came out last night was 35 minutes, and I thought that was kind of a waste of an episode. I'll be honest. Sure. And I'm like, all right, well, let's just, instead of making 6 35 to 45-minute episodes, let's make 3 parts of a really well-written story. Why? Like, because didn't Obi-Wan Kenobi have 6 parts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was like an episode or 2 in there that didn't need it to even exist. And I really feel like maybe we're being a little greedy and being like, hey, we want them to get an extra subscription. Make sure they stick around for an extra month instead of just one, right? So, I don't know. But it seems like The Mandalorian Season 3 did this as well, where they were like, we're just going to throw a massive amount of like nonsense filler episodes in there.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure why Disney keeps doing this. Where did I come from this? I don't. Oh, the time limits on the Star Wars movies. It depends. I would sit there and watch 4 hours of a well-crafted like lore-based Star Wars movie.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I would have no problem with that.
It's funny George brought up time limits though and the length of the movie, because in my opinion this entire next section did not need to exist, which is the Casino Canto Bight section. And I know that's kind of a widely versed opinion, but immediately after the whole situation with Luke, it cuts to Finn and Rose and BB-8 heading to Canto Bight because they got some information from Maz Kanata, who is in the 7th film. And she briefly appears in this, and she basically is like, hey, there's a hacker on Canto Bight. You can go find him there, and if you find him, he'll help you. If I'm recalling correctly, initially the plan was to disable the hyperspace tracker that they had on the New Order ship. So they head there, they get in all these shenanigans, basically. They find who they thought was the hacker, but eventually they get thrown in prison and find Benicio del Toro, known as DJ, in this film.
Yeah.
And he apparently is a hacker as well. And so they get out of Canto Bight and get on a ship, but they're eventually captured on Snoke's flagship. So I'll cut it there. But what do we think about as a whole the Canto Bight sequence?
I'm a lot less critical on this than most people I know, because in my opinion, Star Wars has always had like dumb stuff like this done in their movies. I mean, I think about like Endor with C-3PO, right? And then the worship as a god.
That's
and,
true.
Like the pod racing scenes and like stuff like that. Like there's always like some like dumb little silly thing that's made to sell stuffed animals or to kids, like whatever. I actually don't care about Canto Bight more than the fact that it doesn't seem to mean anything at all in the end.
No, I vehemently disagree about that point. First off, I think it's fucking sick to see Space Vegas. I think that's really cool, just to see like what a casino world. I guess not a world because it's only one city. That's kind of neat, right? Not an entire planet that's a casino. But I think just the idea that like no one cares about the fight between the Resistance and the First Order, right? Like hey, there's this like ideological battle that's happening. Thousands of people are dying. So many people are worried about what this means for the future of the galaxy. And like these dudes are just fucking playing slot machines and like gambling on, space rhino races or like whatever those animals were. Like they just don't care. And like I think that's such a like amazing realization that like, oh, like there's so many important things that are happening every day. Like you should be angry about so much more shit than you are, but you just don't care because it's like, oh, I'm just going to enjoy the thing. And so to see the complete lack of opinion that these people have for what's supposed to be a life or death. I could also see that point like really pissing people off where I'm like, no, I liked it more when like I thought everyone cared about this shit in Star Wars. Like I if that's a completely valid reading of Star Wars too. I'm not going to say anyone who feels that way is wrong. But like I thought it was just like really interesting to see people not give two shits about things that people are dying for. And like people who are actively profiting off people dying.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can see where you're coming from on that point, but you could have shown me like a single shot of that, and that would have come across the same way. The whole casino scene, in my opinion, just feels like a typical goofy Star Wars segment. And also, there's the one kid on this planet who's like crazy force sensitive. that like we seem to like not want to talk about like this kid who has more force potential apparently than anybody else we've ever seen in Star Wars, and that he's the kid at the end that can just pull the broom to him right now. Like Anakin Skywalker couldn't do that, right? So I don't know. It just seems a little wild.
He's like the same age and he couldn't do that.
That's JJ slapping away Rian Johnson's hand. Like I disagree with your point that like Rian Johnson slapped away JJ's hand from the first movie. I just think he made decisions you didn't like, which you're an adult. I'm not going to tell you how to feel about a fucking movie. But like I do think JJ was like, no, I'm just not going to talk about half the shit you brought up in the last movie.
Well, for the record, I do think The Rise of Skywalker is a giant middle finger to Rian Johnson. But I also think The Last Jedi is a giant middle finger.
I agree. I think there are two middle fingers here that we're talking about. So they get off Canto Bight, like I said, with DJ, the hacker guy, and they infiltrate Snoke's ship. They're trying to get in and shut down that hyperspace tracker, but turns out DJ's been a double agent the whole time, and they're captured by Captain Phasma. Who would have saw that coming?
Even before that, like they said that they had 6 minutes between disabling the tracker and then them realizing that the tracking had been disabled. That's like that ship is like the size of a fucking city, man. Like I don't know how they expected to like leave within 6 minutes to not be tracked to get back to the resistance, or if they were just going to escape on their own. It's also like, hey man, I understand that like that's probably how tech works today, that like it does operate in 6 minute or 4 minute cycles with security loops, and like you need to plan ahead. Star Wars is like retro futurism, like you can play like a little looser with the scheduling there, my guy.
So this is something that like has really bugged me even since I watched the movie. When I walked away liking it, is that the space chase makes no sense in the terms of the Star Wars universe, because they're like, oh well, we're locked in, we can't catch up to them, right? All you gotta do is fire your thrusters one more time, and you're gonna be moving faster than them, and you'll catch up. Like the space chase makes absolutely no sense.
Also, if you can track them, then why do you need to follow them?
I just also, like that's the whole overarching plot of the movie. The space is this dire space chase, right? If they had fired the thrusters one more time, each side, they would have pulled away because they would have been going slightly faster, and they would have stayed at speed because they're in fucking space.
Can I just say?
I think it's a metaphor. Like they're losing speed. Yeah. Like they're like this battle is like we're getting kind of sick of this shit. Sorry, Austin. Please.
Can I just say, by the way, that this is not the only ship the New Order has?
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, you're telling me there's not like they show other Star Destroyers at the beginning of this film. They've shown them in the last movie. They show them in the next movie. You're telling me like they couldn't just be like, hey guys, there's a little ship in front of us. Can you guys just get right in front of it and we'll just take care of business here? Like no, weird plot point to me. That whole sequence, it doesn't make sense.
I think that's an interesting conversation. Like I don't know if that's like the best argument about the movie being bad. And like just so we're clear, like I think some things need to happen for the sake of drama. And like I guess this is what they decided on. I don't think it's like the best thing, but like I'm willing to suspend my disbelief to be like, okay, this is the only way out of this situation. Okay, fine. I'll accept that for this. I wish it was executed just like 10% better.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that there. I don't think it's like egregious necessarily. It's just a weird like plot inconsistency to me. So
especially, have we ever worried about fuel before in Star Wars? Is that like I understand they're like, oh, they've got enough Tabana gas to fight the war for another couple of years. Like I understand, like I think that was like a throwaway line in either Jedi or Empire, whatever. But like, just man, how often does fuel come up as a concern in general in Star Wars?
I always assumed that they had like surpassed the need for fuel and had like some sort of like, I don't know, like recurring
nuclear
energy
fusion.
Yeah, like I mean,
I never thought their blasters ran out of ammo. I just thought.
I don't know.
Oh, do you need to replace the lightsaber crystal every like 10 years? Is it like a D battery?
Oh, sorry guys, my lightsaber's out of battery. We can't fire right now.
Fuck you! I couldn't find my USB-C charger. I had to charge it with my USB 2, and man, did not get a full charge after last night. Sorry, boys.
So simultaneously, while this is all happening, while they're getting captured by Phasma and all that ordeal, which by the way, great sequence with BB-8 battling a rival BB unit. Fantastic.
Did they call him BB Hate? Was that his nickname? Like for the evil?
I haven't heard that. That's pretty sweet. I like that.
Yeah. While that's all happening, Rey is also infiltrating the ship, and she gets captured by Kylo Ren, who then brings her to Snoke. And then Snoke reveals that he's the one that connected them through the Force. And that's the reason why they're able to see each other. That's the reason why Rey is seeing Kylo Ren shirtless in his bedroom while she is on another planet.
Hubba hubba.
Yeah. He's very wide. He's very wide. That's one thing we can say about Kylo Ren.
I mean, dude was a Marine, right? Wasn't
I think so.
Adam
Yeah.
Driver in the
Actually,
Marines?
you're right. Yeah. I forgot about that. So he reveals all that, and then we skip away from the throne room for a minute. It's clicks back over to the remaining Resistance members that are there on that ship that's continuing to outrun Snoke's, base ship. And what we discover here, essentially, toward the end of this conversation, is Holdo's big plan. But leading up to it, we have this huge brawl between Poe, a few other Resistance members, and those that believe in Holdo, because essentially Poe finds out they're fueling up some of the I forget what they call them, supply ships. They're not escape pods, but some little, I guess, ships that they have on board. And Poe believes that Holdo, her plan is that they're just going to get on these ships and fly away, essentially,
and just abandon everyone else, right?
Yeah, just abandon everything. And his argument is that, well, if we do that, we're just going to get blown out of the sky because we're not going to be able to outrun this massive ship and these little tiny things. But meanwhile, deep down, Holdo, her kind of plan is to use the ship as a decoy and to let the rest of the crew get to Crate, which is a nearby planet, has an abandoned base there. But still, Poe and the rest of the crew are not buying this plan, and they get this big shootout, and they attempt to take control of the ship from Holdo. And this is another huge issue for me here. It's a good sequence and thought, but couldn't Holdo have just said what her plan was, and then this whole scene becomes null? That was one thing that really stuck out to me here of why was she even being so secretive? It did not make sense in my head.
I used to think that, I really did, and then I thought, like, no, this dude's like a little shit. Like, he's been a dickhead the entire movie. He got so many people killed in the beginning of the movie.
It's true.
It's like, dude, fuck you. Like, I don't need to tell you my plan. Like, I'm in charge. Like, that's like, I've been doing this shit since before you were born. Like, literally. Like, I was there at Endor, whatever. Like, I think she was, like, in comics, whatever. And so it's like, she shouldn't have to tell him. And it's like, I kind of, like, I completely felt that way the first time, where it's just like, wow, you guys could have mitigated this just with, like, one simple conversation. But it's also like, oh yeah, like in comic books when, like, two heroes meet up and they immediately start fighting each other because there's a misunderstanding. Like, it really just felt like that moment. So just like another MCU-ification of Star Wars, which it's kind of like in video games how, like, Far Cry started feeling more like Assassin's Creed over the years, and like Star Wars very slowly started feeling more like the MCU. And I think this was probably like the most egregious offense. But at the same time, like, the older I get, the more I'm like, no, he's like a snot-nosed little shit. He doesn't deserve to know. He, like, lost the entire bomber squadron in the beginning of the movie because he was like a childish dickhead. Like, fuck off, kid.
Also, I feel like she got dumped by some cocky fighter pilot, because there's like a really weird scene after Leia comes back and, like, stuns him, where she, like, holds his face and, like, stares at him longingly, and she's like, I like him.
Yes.
What?
It's very strange. I just completely out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I don't think it's like their entire thing is like questioning authority, right? Like, they stand up to, like, the Empire that was authority, and, like, he was standing up to authority. He was wrong to do it, but, like, I don't know, like, this is the tough part about movies, is like, I feel like I learned this in my film classes. Like, you can literally fucking argue whatever you want. It's just like what you care about at the end of the day.
Yeah. Okay, so
it sucks about movies.
We bounce away from their whole plan, though, for a minute. What I will tell you that is happening, though, before we bounce away, they get on these ships, these evacuation transports, and basically Snoke's ship is like, all right, we're just going to pick them off, because DJ tells Hux about the Resistance's plan, so they're aware of these supply ships. So they just basically start picking them off one by one. We then transition over to the throne room again with Rey and Snoke and Kylo, and Snoke basically tells Kylo, "Well, why don't you kill Rey here? Why don't you just kill her?" And Just do it. And well, that doesn't happen because Kylo kills Snoke.
Yeah. I love this scene.
It's fucking sick. It's so cool.
Yeah.
I do, because this is the only part where they subvert your expectations that I'm like,
correct.
that was cool, right? That was cool. But now that like the whole Snoke thing's been wrapped up, looking back on it, how do you guys feel about Snoke overall? Because it's kind of stupid, right? Like
so into him until like the first 6 minutes of Rise of Skywalker, then immediately disappointed.
Right, because also it doesn't make any sense how he's set up in the story, because Rise of Skywalker doesn't take place that long after this. So Palpatine's just out there, just chilling, like manipulating things, and he has Snoke. And I originally thought that Snoke was possessed by Palpatine. That's incorrect. Snoke is his own person with his own thoughts. I just looked it up.
I thought he was a failed clone of Palpatine.
He is.
Okay.
But they put fake memories in him and then released him. So he's just out there doing things.
Is the alpha build of
and then
Palpatine 2.0?
Palpatine's also just out there doing things, not saying anything.
Right.
But like mischievously like controlling things, like getting a laugh out of it. It doesn't make it.
Not a lot of forethought put there.
Which it is a subversion of expectations. I mean, it is cool because it's almost like the Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader is his father moment in Empire, where it's something that just nobody saw coming. So I like it in that way. But what I will say is the logistics behind it still don't make sense to me. Snoke has, at least in this movie, visually been shown as like a pretty strong guy when it comes to the Force.
Right.
I mean, even within the first 10 minutes, you see him literally picking up Hux with the Force when he is not even on the same ship or remotely in the same location.
He's got all like the potential and training of Palpatine. I would
Right.
assume, right? Like all
Right.
like the abilities of Palpatine. He just doesn't know that he's a clone. I don't like the whole Snoke thing. But in the context of this movie, when they get to the throne room and Kylo Ren kills him and you don't see it coming, I think it's cool.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
I had gone through a pretty traumatic experience the first time I saw Force Awakens. So I was really high when I saw it because I'm like I need to numb myself to this pain I just experienced. Not the movie, just like life stuff. And when they first when Kylo conversed with Snoke at the end of the movie as the planet was falling apart or whatever, and Hux was conversing with Snoke and he was 30 feet tall, in that giant. I was like, holy fuck, is he a giant? Is he actually 30 feet tall? I really thought that. So I was kind of disappointed to see him fit in a normal room and sit on a normal chair. But then this is still my most jaw-dropping moment from any Star Wars movie, and I can't say the Darth Vader scene because I was so young that I just think I feel that was just always a part of Star Wars to me, that Darth Vader was Luke's father. So
Right.
I don't know how I would feel about that if I was 12 and saw him being holy shit. But when he spins the lightsaber around behind his back or whatever and then just slices him in half, that is so goddamn cool. I can't get over it. That is genius. That is the first time we've seen someone die like that. And then I immediately thought, I'm like, man, how come everyone keeps their lightsaber on a hilt right in front of their foot? How come no one's just turned it on to slice into their fucking patella and then just the person falls over and they just ice him that way? Oh god, the possibilities that this opened up were just endless. It was incredible. And I do think that is the coolest set piece in the movie except for Crate. But the actual set design in there is amazing.
So I will say quickly, Hamilton in the chat said it's insane Disney planned nothing out for this trilogy. And I bring that up because I've always wondered, was this the original plan for Snoke? Was this what they foresaw this character, the direction it went as far as dying and being a clone of Palpatine? I mean, was that
There's
him
no way.
dying in this movie, was that a Rian Johnson middle finger to J.J. Abrams in Force Awakens? Because
it has to be.
I would love to know what. I'm frankly, I guess there was no original plan, but I would love to know what they even thought this character would become.
Have you guys ever had a girlfriend who was like, we should do this weekend? We should get a fucking tattoo. And you're like, yeah, we should get a tattoo. That sounds awesome. And then you're like, wait a second, I'm not a tattoo person. Like, I don't want to get I think that's what Rian Johnson did to Disney executives, where he's just like, wouldn't it be so cool if we just turned Star Wars on its fucking ear, if we just flipped the table and just started over new? And everyone's like, let's do that. That's pretty exciting. Like, I think JJ is like the safest pair of hands the first movie could have gone to. And then I do think it's funny because this movie made so much money. The critical response was so positive, but they still got scared and went back to JJ. It was supposed to be Colin Trevorrow. Originally, he was supposed to direct the third one, and
his script was awesome, dude. I don't know if you guys ever read his script.
I will read it for the next episode. We might even have to do that in 2 episodes. One to talk about the movie we got, and one to talk about the movie we could have gotten. But like, Safety Not Guaranteed is like one of my favorite movies of all time. I think that was his feature debut or like second movie, and then he did Jurassic Park forever. I actually got I smoked cigarettes with him because he did screenplay speaking at one of my screenplay classes in college. Super cool dude. We just smoked cigarettes, walked downtown, and talked about Batman Begins fight choreography for like 20 minutes. It was one of my favorite conversations in all of college.
Sounds pretty sweet.
Yeah, it was great. I wish we got to see his movie just to be like, all right, like just give it to a different person every time. Like let's just keep mixing it up. Maybe we'll get something interesting. But I do think the complete lack of planning was I think you're right. I think it was egos clashing at that point. And I think Rian Johnson convinced people to do something different, and JJ was like, fuck you, let's not.
Well, yeah, I don't think episode 9 was JJ's original vision, by the way. I think that was him trying to course correct as much as possible.
I agree.
And I think there's probably a lot of pressure from him, for him, or on him from Disney. But they I think his name was Hamilton, you said, right? Who said that? He's right. I mean, Daisy Ridley said right after The Rise of Skywalker came out that they were changing her origin story up until the last scene that she shot. They just could not decide what they wanted for her. And it's like, how do you not have the main character planned out? How is that possible? Like, what is going on here? And were we just giving these guys unlimited creative freedom? And I don't know, man.
Which, by the way, that's a good time to bring this up because, they kill Snoke. They go through this whole fight sequence with the guards, which, by the way, Seth, you mentioned it earlier. I agree that fight has some good choreography when they're fighting, but then at the same time, you look in the background and there are guys just standing there.
Or they're just jumping and doing 360s. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
But after that fight, which is beautiful because of the throne room and everything that's in it, these guys are wearing these red armor suits. It looks fantastic from a visual standpoint.
Yeah, it does.
What we discover is Kylo claims he knows the origins of Rey and essentially comes out and says, hey, your parents, they weren't anybody. They didn't matter. And I actually kind of like that. I wish they had stuck with that because it would have been different. It would have been somewhat relatable for people versus oh yeah, actually you're just like a Palpatine clone's child.
I would have been fine with it if they hadn't hinted so heavily that she was someone important in the first movie.
That's true.
There's a really confusing scene in The Force Awakens where Rey sees Leia for the first time and they just walk over and hug each other. And Leia's she recognizes Rey. I really think Rey was supposed to be Leia and Han's daughter that got lost, or Luke's daughter or something originally, and that's why that scene exists. Because otherwise it makes no sense.
I thought it was gonna be Obi-Wan and who's the chick from Mandalore?
Sabine.
No,
Satine.
not Sabine.
I'm sorry, Satine.
Duchess Satine, yeah. I thought that was
they were so clearly setting that up. You're right, because then Sabine is in Rebels, and right around the same time that this movie comes out, they show up because Sabine's family was a big mystery at the beginning of Rebels, and then they show her family when this movie shows up. So I think there was something that was leading up there. I don't know.
Which, by the way, when Rey goes and finds the lightsaber in Force Awakens, Ewan McGregor's voice is like by far the most prominent in that sequence.
And there's a whole bunch of weird stuff too, where she like uses Ewan's move or something like that in a fight. It's I don't know.
Yeah, so
ridiculous.
It's kind of interesting, but my understanding is Ryan actually set that like in stone. Like he actually, when he wrote that sequence or directed or whatever he did there, my understanding, I did some research on this week, and this could just be him talking. His thought was like, yeah, in my head, Rey's parents were nobodies.
I mean, it's a big theme of the movie. It's a big theme of the movie, right? Like the way Seth mentioned, like that kid who's just on Canto Bight, who's just like, sweeping up horse shit or whatever, like at the racetracks, like that guy being like an incredibly force sensitive kid. And this movie came out in 2017, but it was filmed in 2016. And like the message of that election that year was populism, right? Like between Bernie Sanders' ascension in the Democratic Party process and Trump's like eventual win in the election, like that was like the de facto message that like won voters, until Hillary got the nomination and then lost the election. Like the idea that like, no, like we need to be for the people. And the fact that like this movie came out and said like, the most important people, they aren't part of some cosmic royalty. Like they are just any person who's just doing good in a situation where they have the power to do good. Like I think that's such a critical mass of that idea in 2016. And I think it's like not a coincidence that like that is supposed to be like the new thesis for Star Wars going forward until it's walked back a little bit in Rise of Skywalker.
Oh, all the way, not a little bit, all the way.
All the way.
Like,
we're totally.
We're taking a dump all over The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker immediately.
I'm not going to defend that movie, but I'm going to defend so many parts of that movie where I'm like, this is easily like, if they just set this to like a fucking rock song, like this is one of the greatest music videos I've ever seen. And there's like 9 to 12 different scenes in that movie where I feel that way. I'm like, yeah, Babu Frick, that'd be an amazing 9 Inch Nails, like industrial rock music video. Just seeing him in his fucking workshop, that'd be sick. The opening, like light speed skipping. The song that what's her nuts Sabine was like racing out of the Lothal on, like that was the Illuminati Hotties. I'm like, fuck yeah, man! Like let's set this song to 19 different scenes from Rise of Skywalker, and it's gonna be sick. But yeah, not a great movie.
We're gonna get there. So
yeah, we are.
They finish up this fight sequence. Kylo asks Rey to join him. She doesn't. They have some sort of force battle, and the Luke's saber snaps in half.
You're still holding on. Yeah.
You think either one of them thought to just walk forward while using the force and grab it?
No, not at all.
They're standing and still grabbing it, right? But like they theoretically could have just taken a couple steps forward and grabbed it while they were pulling. I don't know.
They could have.
Just a funny thought.
So. But all that happens, and then eventually, this is where we get back to our whole situation with BB-8, Finn, and Rose. They go and fight Phasma. Finn beats the crap out of Phasma with like a laser thing. I don't know what it is.
Let's go, Chrome Dome, which is his tagline.
Yeah, Chrome Dome. Chrome Dome sucks. Also, like again, like this movie has so many unceremonious deaths. And, like, I guess I get it, because, like, Boba Fett died unceremoniously in Return of the Jedi, so, like, there's precedent, I guess, but, like, I don't know, Phasma was, like, a relatively cool character, I guess. Like, at least in theory, she was a cool character. I didn't like them throwing her into the trash compactor in...
Yeah.
Like, that feels like, let's give her a swirly and then a noogie and leave her in the dumpster. Like, that's literally what they did. Like, they American graffitied her ass in Force Awakens.
I was gonna say she has a cool outfit. That's pretty
she has a cool outfit, but like I also think it's menacing. Like Finn is trying to live a new life with the Resistance, right? And she's the only person who knows his old life. So she could be like I think he said that was his first mission out, right? Like when he didn't shoot his weapon at the beginning of Force Awakens. But also like I don't know, like I assume you have to do some pretty heinous shit to be a First Order Stormtrooper in training. Like, she's the only person who knows like, oh, he cried himself to sleep ever. Like she could like really like humiliate him with his past, and like the fact that like she just knows more about him than anyone else in the movie and is just fucking iced so quickly.
Yeah.
after appearing in this movie.
Which, by the way, is her armor Beskar?
No, it can't be because he breaks her helmet with
Because it chips off.
That's what I was
Yeah.
gonna say, but it's interesting because she has the same staff that
Oh yeah.
what's her name, who is now in Ahsoka, from my understanding, who was in Mandalorian season 2 that Ahsoka fought. She literally has that same Beskar staff that appears.
Well, it's not the same exact one because that one gets
No,
melted down.
not the same one, but it appears to be like pretty much the same exact mold, at least, which is
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
But
Also, I will say when the Star Wars Force Awakens toys released, I definitely drove an hour away from my hometown to get to the Toys R Us so I could buy a Captain Phasma action figure because
Nice.
I thought that design was sick as hell.
by the way,
Cool.
I missed immediately prior to this fight sequence, I missed perhaps what is my favorite sequence in the entire film, which is we bounce back to Holdo. She realizes these transport ships are getting picked off. She, of course, like I mentioned earlier, stayed behind in that main resistance ship. She then turns it around and puts that thing in a hyperspeed directly into Snoke's main ship, which visually is one of the coolest sequences in film, in my opinion.
I agree. Actually, I think it's really
Yeah.
gorgeous.
It's really well
And-
done. The effect of her hitting the ship and then the like pieces just pinging out like a little bit at a time. It's really, really cool. Really, really cool.
Should have been Akbar, but yeah, it was sick. Save Holdo. I like Holdo a lot.
Yeah.
Save her for the next movie. Give Akbar like a glorious ride into the sunset, but incredible. That and the next year was Crazy Rich Asians,
Mhm.
which I don't know if either of you guys saw that movie, but there's like a
Uh-huh.
wedding sequence that also messes around with like the distortion of sound in that, where like there's like one band playing When Fools Rush In, like the Presley song. And it's just like it felt very similar to me, despite being totally opposite like moments in movies. But yeah, I realized when movies fuck with sound, that is like one of my favorite things,
Yeah.
and it is so beautifully done in Last Jedi.
It is. So from there, everybody gets down to Crate. You know, some of those ships have already made it down there where that old Resistance base was, but now Rey, or I guess not Rey at this point, but Finn and Rose and BB-8, they all get down there and kind of join up with the rest of the crew and Leia. And simultaneously, while all that's happening, the First Order also makes their way down there with some cool looking AT-ATs. I don't know what those things are called, but they look like massive compared to the normal ones.
They like walk on knuckles, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
They look awesome. But they pull out what is essentially a siege cannon that I think Finn described as like essentially a mini Death Star that they are attempting to use on this big barrier that is part of this old Resistance base, and they're trying to get in. And this is where Luke finally shows up. He kind of walks into the base and sees Leia. Pretty good sequence there. And he walks out. And Kylo Ren spots him. He's kind of just out on his own, standing in front of the base there, kind of on this salty red planet. And Kylo's like, essentially, light them up, boys, and just every single unit they have just obliterates quote unquote Luke. But then Luke's fine. So obviously something's going on here. Obviously something's going on with Luke.
Well,
Hello.
like,
go ahead.
no, I just think it's so funny because you realize immediately that Luke looks different, right? You're like, wow, did he really like shave and like take a
shave,
shower
showered
on the way here? Like, was that really one of his priorities? I mean, I guess he's probably hadn't taken a bath in a while, but and then like he pulls out the blue lightsaber, right? And you're like, oh, okay, some nonsense is going on right now. Which, where's his green lightsaber? You know, why in his head he only had the blue lightsaber for like what, a year?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't he like visualize the green one? You know, that's
Maybe it's because he tried to kill his nephew with it.
I guess.
Never crossed my mind, to be honest. Like I
Yeah.
thought, like, oh, like he's ready to be like the next, like he's ready, like he's accepted Vader or whatever, like accepted Anakin. He's ready to use that lightsaber. Like I didn't think twice about it. So I did not think he was a force projection from across the galaxy. Spoilers.
Oh, really? Well,
yeah.
I guess I knew something with fishy was up originally, but like looking back on it, I assumed this was like how Luke viewed himself, right? Like you know how like they always say like you think like you're way more attractive than you are, and like he probably hadn't seen himself in a mirror in a long time and whatnot. So whatever, you know.
Had a bigger dick, packing heat downstairs. Yeah, typical.
So I that's why I assumed. That's why I was like, well, why wouldn't he have the green one? Because that's like his lightsaber, you know. But whatever, it's not important. Continue, Austin.
So Kylo Ren comes down after that sequence where, like I said, just literally everything possible fires on Luke and he's fine. He has that great moment where he like brushes off his shoulder, which is a pretty good little moment there. And then Kylo comes down. They start quote unquote fighting, but as you discover, something is certainly off because Luke is not even attempting to swing the saber. He's not being touched in any way. He's not, they're not clashing sabers in any way during this fight. And then eventually you get what you believe is this big build-up moment of Kylo slashing through Luke, but it turns out he couldn't even hit him because he's not even there.
Yep.
So what do you guys think about this whole sequence? I mean, I still don't know how I feel about Luke not actually being there.
Well, what did that accomplish? Right? Like what was the point of it?
The point that they propose is that it gave the resistance inside the base time to get out the back exit way, essentially.
To escape, yeah.
Right. It was essentially a decoy, was what they say in the movie. But at the same time, I'm like, how did he even know that was the plan? Like, they didn't even talk about that.
Well, he could have kept the act going a little longer, I think, right? I mean, this was like a minute-long sequence. You know? I don't know.
I agree.
I guess, but it's fine, I guess. It's a dumb way for Luke Skywalker to die. It's dumb. It's a dumb way for him to die.
This is so like in 2019, I wrote a long blog post about like why I hated this movie. And like the number one point I have is Luke phones in the final fight, literally. Like he's not there. Like it would have meant so much more if he had actually been there. If he had shown up for his sister, if he had shown up for like the cause that like he dedicated his life to, because the Resistance, it's the Rebel Alliance, it's the same fucking thing. And the like my three biggest points about why I didn't like this movie: Luke phones in the final fight. The scope is too small. No one is special, not even the special people. And I think all those moments or all those complaints are kind of magnified in this one scene, right? Like Luke phones in the final fight, so like Kylo Ren isn't even important enough to show up to. Luke is so powerful, he doesn't even need to physically be there. Like, okay, that doesn't make sense. Like, what if he closed himself off from the Force? Like, couldn't he have like projected himself across the galaxy before to be there if he wasn't there? Like, there was just, it made me ask too many questions. It didn't give me enough satisfying answers. And the fact that like the entire First Order just became like one line of Imperial not AT-ATs, right? Like not Imperial walkers, and like the entire Resistance could fit on the Millennium Falcon at the end of the movie. And it's just like, that was probably my biggest problem still with this movie, is that like the scale didn't feel
it never made sense.
Appropriately epic to me. And I'm like, no, this is fucking galactic war, man. Like, show me something I'm not gonna see if I see like a World War II movie. Show me something epic. Show me something amazing. And I just still don't feel like I got that. I do again think like the desperate attempt of them using like the salt skimmers or whatever they're called, right? Like the one-wheeled things against the Imperial. Like, I love them being like, oh, we're gonna do this because we're the good guys and we're gonna win. And the fact that they just get clowned immediately, I'm like, okay, that's kind of great. Like, why did you think your little shit thing could like stand up to these giant robotic apes that have cannons the size of, your old ships that you don't have anymore because you guys are dumb? Like, there's so much that I like about this, but like the fact that, again, the entire Resistance can like fit on the Millennium Falcon, the fact that they like called for their allies to show up and no one showed up, like reinforces why I think that Canto Bight scene is so important. Because like literally no one gives a shit. no one cares about this battle except for these people who claim it's the most important thing in the world, you know? And so like I just think this movie presents so many interesting ideas that are simultaneously walked back and dumbly reinforced in the next movies. Like I think this movie is haunted by Rise of Skywalker.
Sorry,
in a big
Austin.
way.
I know you're trying to get out of here because we're running long.
No, it's fine.
But I just wanted to rewind because we skipped over.
Yeah, I realized we skipped a big sequence.
The skimmers
Yes.
and the I don't know, the beam breaking down the door. Beautiful scene.
Mm-hmm.
Another one of the biggest issues I have in this movie is Finn sacrificing himself heroically was the perfect exit point for his character right there. And I think that's one thing almost everyone that I've seen agrees on is that like Finn should have died there, and that would have meant so much more. And
I agree.
That would have been a much, much better way to handle his character than the limbo that he was in episode 9. Because that would have been just like the perfect little story arc of like, you know, defected stormtrooper, and then, you know, he learns to care about his friends or whatever, and then sacrifices himself for the resistance at the end. And Rose ruined it. And the other issue I have is that the way that sequence plays out doesn't seem to make sense unless the laser is like pushing his ship back, which then the whole thing wouldn't work anyway. But she goes on a wide angle and then hits him perpendicular, and then she kisses him while all their friends are about to be murdered, and it's like a really weird, awkward scene that I hate.
Also,
and it seems like a giant wasted opportunity.
How did both of them not die upon impact of that collision?
Also, great question.
Because it shows those things just breaking apart, like brutally breaking apart, and Finn's just fine. Finn doesn't have any issues.
Didn't see a windshield. Didn't seem like a high valued Consumer Reports crash rating on those skimmers. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like did not get 4 out of 5 stars on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree, though. I think it would have made so much more sense for frankly, to remove the death of Luke Skywalker here, and for the big death at the end to have been Finn in this moment. I think that would have made so much more sense from a storytelling standpoint.
I disagree because I think we were kind of promised like a black stormtrooper Jedi from the Force Awakens marketing material.
That's true.
Right? Like we were promised that, and like at this point there was still technically potential for that. I think you're right, Seth. Like they definitely like made a joke of his character in this movie, and then they did something arguably even worse in Rise of Skywalker, where they just made him inconsequential.
Right.
Like he has like that one semi-epic scene, I guess, where he does like a horse charge on the deck of a Star Destroyer, but like I'm struggling to think of a second thing he does in that movie, like off the top of my head. I can't.
He chases Rey the whole movie. That's what he does. He chases Rey that whole movie. And then it's just like that. This would have been a better
exit,
way for his character to work. And I hate the kiss scene. What is going on? Are we serious?
That part I do get. Where if you think you're about to die, fuck it. Like let me get one smoochie in. Like that part I get.
I just watched it again. The door blows up and then she kisses him. And hey, back off.
Dude, they'd be crying.
We got stuff to do. We got a situation going on here. All right. You keep it in your pants for a day. All right. We got stormtroopers behind me. I got these massive AT-ATs above me. I got time.
But he doesn't care because he was about to die. He was ready to kill himself anyway. So what the fuck does he care about all that stuff?
Probably mad. You saved me, right? I was going to sacrifice myself. You saved me, and now our friends are dead.
Yeah, he has that line.
That's true.
Right? Like,
I hate that scene. I don't know.
Also, we talked about it a little bit, but I just have to like reinforce when they're like driving on the surface of Crate, and it's like the white ground turning into red because of like the salt or whatever.
So cool,
gorgeous,
beautiful,
so awesome. Yeah,
beautiful sequence, and the particle effects in that scene are fantastic too, with like the salt flying into the air as they're driving by. It's awesome.
One of the worst levels in Star Wars Battlefront 2, but
Yes.
such a cool location in the movie. Yeah.
So basically, the film wraps up here after all that goes down with Rey, who has shown up somewhere in the sequence. I think she showed up kind of as part of the skimmer sequence in the Millennium Falcon, if I'm recalling correctly. As Luke is fighting Kylo, Rey attempts to find the rest of the Resistance and finds that back way into the base, which is basically a bunch of rubble. And she uses the Force and opens it up, and everybody gets out. Kind of simultaneously, Luke disappears. I guess he used up all his Force energy to project himself on this other planet, so he dies. And then Rey gets everybody out, and they go their own way and are able to escape. And that's kind of how it ends, aside from a little boy on Canto Bight moving a broomstick with the Force. And that is it.
And that's the last half hour of the movie, by the way. And
yeah,
pretty drawn out, but
it is.
Really cool chase sequence between Chewie and the Falcon and a bunch of TIE fighters too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah,
I think they go like underground, like a salt cavern. I'm just like, fuck, that looks really cool. And I think J.J. Abrams thought that was cool too, because that's basically the first shot in Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah.
when they're talking to their spy in the next movie.
That's exactly what I was just thinking of, by the way.
Which again, sick ass music video. I think that set to Ocean Avenue by Yellowcard would be incredible.
Yeah, so I thought the ending was pretty good overall. I mean, I guess it ends on somewhat of a good spot, but it feels still to me, it's kind of like, well, if there were already TIE fighters out and about, I mean, certainly they could have flown around and found the ship as everybody was getting on it. I don't know. That's
so
just
why
me
can't
being
they
nitpicky.
why can't they track the Millennium Falcon where it goes?
That's true.
I'll say, wait, no, that's not the final scene. The final scene is the little kid, right? Like doing the broomstick thing.
Yeah, that's the very final sequence is the kid doing the broomstick. And I think actually part of that is these kids all gathered together and talking about like the legend of Luke Skywalker, essentially. So that's pretty much where it ends.
I thought Rise of Skywalker was going to have like a 15-year time gap.
It should have. It really should have. I think I would have respected it more if it did. Because all these movies feel too cramped together.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to realize that there is actually like a pretty decent gap between The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, where Leia trains Rey. I think it's only like the novelization or something. Somewhere it's mentioned, but it's not apparent in the movie. So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think overall though we've been nitpicking, and if you remember at the very start of this conversation, I still think this is a great movie. I have a lot of issues with it. I think Luke being number one is by far my biggest problem with this film. His character just does not feel like his character to me. George,
blatant misunderstanding of his character.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But George does bring up a good point with the fact that, like, yeah, I mean, it has been 30 years since we've seen him. So I'm not opposed to believing that that's why there was some change, but at the same time, it still doesn't feel right to me. But I actually really enjoy this movie as a whole.
I'm much more angry and crotchety than I was 30 years ago. I was 3 years old, but still, I was.
But I feel like if Mark Hamill himself said that, right? Like Mark Hamill probably understands Luke Skywalker better than anybody, or George Lucas, right? But Mark Hamill's like, I don't agree with anything you've done with this character. Then it's probably a legitimate concern. And I hate it. I hate Luke Skywalker in this movie. I hate him. What a terrible written character.
So here's
who do you like less, him or Poe?
Poe's kind of a non-issue. Poe's annoying, but Luke Skywalker may be the most famous cinema hero in history, and he's his morals and character are what define him. Otherwise, he's just a blonde dude who wields a laser sword, right? I think Luke Skywalker is way more egregious in this movie.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think the big question here for me has always been, I wonder what would have happened if they had just buckled down and continued with what was set in stone here in this movie rather than trying to retcon everything possible in 9. Because I really do. Go ahead.
Read the screenplay that leaked from Colin
Okay.
Trevorrow. Yeah, it's really good. What we were to got in episode 9 seems like it would have been fucking sweet. And this would have been clearly the worst movie in the trilogy.
Because that's my issue on a whole. I think this movie is great. There are just so many things that don't matter anymore because it's all been written away, essentially. It's all been changed post-mortem. So
But there was a 2-year gap between this and Rise of Skywalker. And I actually I think Rise of Skywalker is the worst one, but also I think I've shared the story before, but I saw that with my 5-year-old niece.
Yeah.
4-year-old niece. And she thought it was the greatest movie she's ever seen. It was no different to her seeing that movie than when I was her age watching Empire Strikes Back. So I don't doubt that this movie has its audience with people, but god damn, am I so annoyed by so many things in Rise of Skywalker that I love my niece. I don't think she has the comprehension to get there yet. I think when she's older she'll really hate it. But I don't think this movie walked back as much from Force Awakens as Rise of Skywalker does Last Jedi.
I agree.
And I think Rise of Skywalker takes so much of the teeth out of The Last Jedi. So maybe that's why I'm actually pretty soft on this movie. I just feel like it was cut down, needlessly, because a director who thought he was oh no, I can't do more than one. That's so arrogant. Then he sees this, he's like, man, fuck that. I'm doing I'm fixing it. I'm fixing the Star Wars. And it's just is it arrogance? Was it hubris? Would a less experienced director be all right, I guess these are the plots we're taking forward. I don't know. I think it's such a fascinating just microcosm of what it meant to be a blockbuster Hollywood movie in this era. I'm happy we got it, but I'm also man, what could have been? Would I still care about Star Wars as much as I did when I was a kid? Also, it's okay that I don't. I'm 33. I don't need to care about it as much as 7-year-old me did.
Do you care about it as much as Seth does? That's the real question.
Seth was way kinder on this movie than I thought he was going to be. I thought you were just going to be hawking loogies the entire time.
So what you guys got to understand about me is I really care about the lore and world of Star Wars, right? That really matters a lot to me. And this movie shits all over it. Just constantly shits all over it. So that is my biggest issue with this movie, and it's why if I'm rewatching Star Wars, this is never going to be one of my watch,
Yeah.
But there's stuff I like about it. There's stuff there's shots that I think are cool. Like I said, overall, I hate this movie. So,
well, very well. There we have it. There's our revisit to Star Wars Episode 8. So let us know after the show goes up or in the comments down below if you're watching on YouTube your thoughts on the movie. I hate that we miss Coach's thoughts because I think he is very negative on this film from my understanding. So we'll have to hear his thoughts at some point. But it's interesting. I know we'll hit 9 at some point. I'm not sure if we have an exact schedule set on that one, but we should hit it hopefully within the next few months. So we'll let you all know ahead of time so that you can watch the movie and kind of tag along with us. Because 9, I would not say is as controversial, but there is definitely a lot to talk about with that movie.
yes. That's I don't even know. Is there a lot to talk about with 9? I mean, it's like it was AI generated, right? I mean, it's kind of what it feels like.
Pretty much. Yeah. Chat GPT made it.
Yeah, I mean that is what that movie feels like.
So Anyway, thank you all for listening. Thanks for sticking in with us here on this episode 132 of Frameskip. Again, as I mentioned earlier, don't forget, if you are listening to us on podcast services, you can, of course, catch us live on YouTube as we record. Our YouTube channel is just Frameskip. You can find it at bit.ly/Frameskip and then we usually post on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram when we are going to go live. Usually it's every other Tuesday or Wednesday. So next week, in this case, we'll be live on September 5th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So we'll be live then to talk about something. So go check the YouTube channel. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget you can listen to the audio version on podcast services. So we are on various social media platforms at Frameskip Pod on pretty much anything: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I am on Twitter at Austin J. Eller. George is at Shortbox Summary. And then Seth is at Seth the 90s Kid, but definitely don't follow him.
Don't follow me.
Don't do it. Don't you dare. Don't you freaking dare.
If you got something you want to say to Seth, say it to me first, and then I'll maybe relay it to Seth.
You know what? Don't even attempt to look up Seth the 90s Kid on Twitter. Let's cut that off right now. Don't even try.
I hear your phone will just catch on fire the second you type in at Seth the 90s Kid.
Yeah, like I immediately find your address if you do that.
Yeah, and he's gonna show you all the different tints of his rainbow karate belt. Got every color. It's
gonna be like Rey and Kylo Ren. Seth is gonna suddenly show up in your house shirtless.
Oh, with his fucking dinner plate pecs just taking up the whole screen.
All right, everybody. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week. Until then, see ya.